Hello and welcome to India's World. In a rare show of unity at a summit in Paris, leaders of several African nations have agreed on a regional plan to combat Boko Haram. Boko Haram is the Islamic extremist group which has kidnapped more than 200 Nigerian schoolgirls and threatened to sell them into slavery. The group is largely active in northern Nigeria, North Cameroon and Niger. The group's real name in Arabic means the group of the people of the Sunnah for preaching and for struggle. However, it is more commonly known as Boko Haram, literally meaning Western education is sin. Boko Haram has indulged in spectacular terrorist acts and wants to set up an Islamic state in northern Nigeria. To discuss the Boko Haram crisis in Nigeria and the international response to it, I have with me three experts. We have with us Ambassador Nalin Surie. He's been India's ambassador to China, High Commissioner to UK, and in the Foreign Office he was Secretary West and looked after India's policy towards Africa. We have with us Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev. He was India's High Commissioner to Nigeria and to Cameroon and Ambassador to Benin and Chad. And we have Dr. A.S. Yaruingam. He is Head of the Department of African Studies in Delhi University. I welcome all of you to this discussion. Ambassador Surie, let me ask you a basic question. What are the origins of Boko Haram and what is the extent of its influence?
I think the influence of Boko Haram, you have to go back to the spread of Islam, especially the Salafist variety of Islam in these parts of Africa. Not just, I think, in Nigeria, but in other parts right across the Sahel. This is not a new movement. It's over a decade old. It's gone from one form of, I think, extremism to another form of extremism. But the origins, I think, lie in a multiplicity of factors, including, for instance, in income inequalities, a feeling of discrimination, certain law and order actions taken by the Nigerian authorities against this group where a very large number of their followers were killed. I believe it was in several hundreds. So it's a whole series of factors which I think has given them a certain amount of salience and a certain amount of traction. But on the other hand, they seem to believe that conducting and indulging in outrageous activities is the best form of going ahead. I don't think that is the case, and that's why the international community is reacting the way it has.
We'll come to those acts in a minute. Ambassador Sachdev, what is the main aim of Boko Haram? Because people say they want to establish an Islamic caliphate in northern Nigeria. Is that a realistic goal?
No, it's largely rhetorical. They are engaging in pyrotechnics, asking for Sharia to be imposed. Nigeria is a multi-ethnic, multi-racial, multi-religious society, and it's not a viable proposition to have Sharia imposed all over Nigeria, when over half of Nigeria is not Muslim.
But is it practical to have Sharia imposed in northern Nigeria, which is largely Muslim?
In fact, majority of northern Nigeria's 19 states already have Sharia in one form or the other. It's more formalistic than real, if I can say so. Why? Because nearly 30% of northern Nigeria's population is non-Muslim, basically migrants from south.
Professor Yaruingam, what are the political, socio-economic, ideological factors that lead to support of at least a section of the population for Boko Haram?
I think let me just go back a little bit in the origin of the Boko Haram.
Yeah.
I think if we trace back to history, it would begin from 1903 when British took over northern Africa, northern Nigeria.
Yeah.
At that time, they introduced Western education, they introduced the missionaries, the Christian religions, and there were a lot of dissatisfaction, discontentment among the Muslims that time. It was this Boko Haram, the offshoot of that one.
Initially, it was Sachdev,
yes,
which is a student movement, and Sachdev then transformed itself into Boko Haram, if I understand correctly, or at least those people moved to Boko Haram.
And that's why the British left. There was a lot of discontentment among them. There was a person who take up Muhammad Malwa, who was so outspoken against the Christian and Western educations. I think Boko Haram is the extension of that movement. He created a lot of chaos and a lot of people are killed at the time. Now it was taken up later on by new leaders. That was Yusuf Muhammad in 2002, and he started this. It was not begin as a movement, it was just education institutions to teach Sharia law, at the same time educate the underprivileged children. Then slowly it converted into a movement based on the Sharia law, and they want to establish a pure kinds of Islamic sect, and that was mixed up with the underprivileged, poverty, all the inequality that has entered in society at that time. I thought that was the beginning point of this movement of this Boko Haram.
But Muhammad Yusuf, who launched Boko Haram,
yeah,
died, and then leadership moved to Abu Bakr Sheikhu.
Yeah.
So, is Abu Bakr Sheikhu a more radical person than Muhammad Yusuf?
Muhammad Yusuf was, in a sense, in my understanding, was mostly based on religious movement, of course mixed up with the political social movement. But now in the later stage when this Seko took over, it was mostly social political movement, focused on the inequality that exists there, poverty, exploitation taking place in the society. And the focus direction was changed.
Okay. Ambassador Surie, what makes northern part of Nigeria a fertile ground for Boko Haram? Is it poorer than the rest of the country? You pointed to it earlier.
I believe so, but I think there are other reasons also. It's a traditionally Muslim area, as I think the professor mentioned. The northern part tends, and as Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev also mentioned, the northern part tends to have a majority Muslim population. And I think the issue is also one of open borders with the neighbors. So there is also fertile land to move across. It's easy for them to move across to hide. But I think the basic reasons, from what I understand, I mean, are the facts of deprivation, inequalities, poverty, the fact that a lot of their followers were killed in law and order operations by the Nigerian forces.
That happened largely in 2009 when about 1,000 of them were killed. Yeah. But Boko Haram has existed, Sachdev existed in 1995.
True, but
2002 onwards, you can say that Muhammad Yusuf and the movement then.
I think the reason why the revenge aspect is important is because, and this is important, I don't think they have that many resources, fortunately. They are able to carry out these kind of outrageous activities because they are in parts of the country which are not all that well governed or are distant from centers of policing. But the fact that revenge is a motivation, I think, should not be discounted, particularly because if you look at the latest moves that are taking place, that they have already lowered their demands for release of these girls. They are no longer talking about their top leadership to be released. They are talking about their cadres to be released, their families to be released. Okay. So I think there's a mix of reasons. I don't think you can point one single finger on what is the most important.
We will discuss some more of these reasons in this discussion. But we need to take a break at this point. We'll be back again with you in a bit. Don't go away. Welcome back. We are discussing Boko Haram and the crisis in Nigeria. Ambassador Sachdev, what sense does it make for Boko Haram to kidnap nearly 3,000 schoolgirls, load them into trucks, take them into forests, convert them into Islam and threaten to sell them into slavery or marry them off? This is not a typical Boko Haram action, because in the past they have targeted individuals. They have not kidnapped people in large groups. So, is this unusual, and why are they doing it, and why would they want to attract attention on themselves?
It's a good question. First of all, let me correct you if I may. Yes. There are 300 girls, not 3,000.
300, sorry. 276 to be exact.
276. Yeah. There's some confusion. Yeah. Some of them ran away, and some of them sort of the records were destroyed, as the school authorities say. I think this question needs to be put in a different manner. Boko Haram, by definition, doesn't want Western education. They especially don't want girls to be educated. Now, they hit the two boxes by this stroke. These girls were taking their secondary exams, last paper to be precise of physics, and secondly, they were girls. And most of them, by definition, I suppose, were Christians. So they extend the problem to the Christian parents and straddle across fault line of Islam and Christianity.
Okay. Professor Yaruingam, let me ask you a slightly different question. Now, if you look at Nigeria, it's the highest, produces the highest amount of oil in Africa, ample rainfall in half the country this year, good soil, resourceful people. You would expect that Nigeria would be a wealthy country. Yet, you find that Nigeria is confronted with the worst form of terrorism it has ever known. Why is that?
See, that's the very reason that this movement has come up. In spite of having such rich resources, why people are under poverty, where there is such inequality. If you look at the equality rate, I think the richest in Africa will be Nigeria, and the poorest will be in Nigeria. Whereas there is a source of oil, it's supposed to be convert the nation to be one of the most prosperous, distribute wealth to all the people. I think that's the very reason this Boko Haram has started movement. I think that's the reason there. Corruptions, nepotisms, and the kinds of politics that's involved there is very worse than any other country in the world. We read in the paper. That's the reason.
Master Surie, in January 2012, Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan said that the supporters of Boko Haram are present in the executive, they are present in the judiciary, they are present in the legislature, and they are even present in the Nigerian army. Now, why would a terrorist organization enjoy this kind of support? And we are, the executive, the judiciary, the legislature is present. Not only these are people not only from the north, I presume. I mean, the army is a Nigerian army, not a North Nigerian army. So why is there this kind of support amongst the elite?
Well, as my colleague said, it's a poor rich country. I mean, you have extreme rich and you have extreme poor, and the system, whether it's the bureaucracy or the judiciary or the armed forces, are a microcosm of the entire society. And you may be well off in a particular job, but you still have people back home who are poor. So sympathy for those who do not have is still very strong in segments of the ruling elite. I mean, elite itself has a lot of differences in income, and there is a huge amount of inequality there. So I'm not surprised that they have elements in the judiciary or in the
although they say it's come down in the army, it's certainly come down now.
It would, but I think after all these institutions, when you recruit, as Ambassador Sachdev said, in a multi-ethnic, multi-religious society, there have to be elements from all these components of society. So they will have sympathy for these kind of elements.
Ambassador Sachdev, to what extent is the government and the regime of President Goodluck Jonathan itself responsible for the rise of Boko Haram? I say this because according to some reports, President Goodluck Jonathan and his cronies siphoned off $20 billion of oil revenue, which belongs to the national exchequer, through by laundering it through national and international banks. And the central bank governor who was investigating it was sacked by the president himself.
Can I comment on the last question of yours? I think I have some value to add. Nigeria is a recent entity. It's celebrating its centenary this year. 100 years ago, there was no Nigeria. It got its independence only 54 years ago in 1960. So the national identity is a bit weak, and it is subsumed in tribal, ethnic, linguistic and religious identities. So this divide between national identity and other identities often leads to conflict. And that is what President was hinting at, that the Boko Haram sympathizers are
so those are more ethnic and tribal sympathizers.
Yes, and they are stronger overlay over the national identity very often. Now coming to the other question, I think corruption is not a new phenomenon in Africa or in Nigeria. By its own ramifications, Nigerians have a serious problem of mismanagement, malfeasance and bad governance. But that itself is a given, and if that yardstick was to be taken as the reason, it may be a contributor, but as the justification.
Would you agree with him, Professor, that the regime of President Goodluck Jonathan is not any more or any less corrupt than other regimes in Africa? Or is Nigeria particularly corrupt and this regime is so corrupt that people are supporting Boko Haram?
I think corruption has been rooted so deeply, so no matter how much he tried, it will take time to come up. So we cannot say that even though he is cleaner than other, corruption is not there. So general phenomena, corruption is deeply impressed in the mind of the people, and that has affected the mind of many people who are poor. I think that's one of the reasons that I said Boko Haram movement started. In fact, Boko Haram was started with the idealism of establishing a Sharia law kingdom in the northern Africa, actually.
Because the secular regime had failed.
Yes.
Therefore, a clean religious Sharia regime.
Yeah. So still they have attached with the movement of separation from North. This Sharia movement, if you look at it very carefully, Boko Haram movement, there is still one point of attachment of separation from Nigeria to establish their own kingdom based on Sharia law.
Okay.
I think that's a very much a way to look at that thing. And one of the things that which I feel that President Jonathan has failed is when declare emergency to the area of this movement. Immediately he, declared emergency and tried to put down by force, and that is the retaliation was so strong.
Okay.
That's why a lot of violence take place. If you look at the violence taking place,
this is what Ambassador Surie was saying earlier.
It was since 2010 onward, whereas movement was started in 2002.
Yeah. Okay.
The government policy, but we have to look at.
All right. We need to take a break at this point again. We'll be back again with this interesting discussion. Don't go away. Welcome back. We are discussing the Boko Haram-led crisis in Nigeria. Ambassador Sachdev, do you agree with Professor Yaruingam that Boko Haram at first was really a cry for justice because the secular institutions of Nigeria had failed?
Put differently, it was a call for going to puritanical Islam. It was thought that following military dictatorships end in 1999, there was a vacuous state of affairs and democracy was stillborn, and many doubted its credentials.
Yeah.
And here was a call by Muhammad Yusuf, who was a preacher of the biggest mosque in Maiduguri, the capital of Borno, to go
Borno
for
is
the
the state in northeast,
which is which is at the epicenter of Boko Haram crisis now. So he founded Boko Haram to look for identity of his people in terms of Sharia and going back to Islam. Now I should add here very briefly that Borno people have their own identity separate from northern identity. Northerners are basically Hausa Fulanis, while Bornos are Kinuris. They are more linked to Chad and Central Africa.
Both are Muslims, what?
They are all Muslims initially, but their identity is more vis-a-vis Chad and Central African Empire or Republic.
Ambassador Surie, is Boko Haram largely a movement with a domestic agenda for Nigeria and areas adjoining Nigeria, or does it have a international agenda? Because a lot of people have said that Boko Haram is linked with Al Qaeda. President Jonathan keeps on saying it's linked with Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, as it is called. Or do you think that they merely take ideological inspiration from Al Qaeda and are an autonomous and independent organization?
I think as of now it is more Nigerian and regional in that sense. But given the tentacles of Al Qaeda, I think the fear is that if they are not controlled or they are not sort of brought into the mainstream, then they could actually be taken over by the Al Qaeda or merge into Al Qaeda and then become a much bigger problem, more difficult to handle. So the short answer to your point is, as of now, I believe it is more Nigeria and the region around Nigeria based. But the danger is that it could be subsumed by a bigger organization of the Al Qaeda variety.
Ambassador, do you agree with him?
Largely. I think there are international manifestations, but mostly on the import side and not on the export side. They have kidnapped Frenchmen, Canadians, and an Italian nun, etc. They have only 2 days ago raided a Chinese-aided facility, Sinhydro, and taken away 10 Chinese workers. So there is certain attempt at internationalization. On the import side, Libyan weapons, training camps in Mali, Niger, Chad, Central African Republic, Sudan, and Somalia have been mentioned by President Jonathan himself.
But that means it has the wherewithal to convert itself into an international movement like Al-Qaeda.
I suppose so. The intentions are all there.
Okay. Professor Yaruingam, will Boko Haram and the struggle against Boko Haram play a role or impact the national elections next year? And if President Goodluck Jonathan wins next year, would it in any way change the dynamics of dealing with Boko Haram?
Most probably. Most probably because this movement can turn out to be another social movement which against the government, because their grievance against the government for poverty, exploitation, all these things. So it could be manipulated by certain political parties and affected the elections. And second point, that whether if a new leader comes, will the policy be changed? I think that have to look at. I think very difficult to predict.
No, I said if Goodluck Jonathan continues,
yeah,
then the dynamics doesn't change. You would probably need a new person to change the dynamics.
Mostly that will be, I think, the right way to get a new person who can take care of, I think.
And this is not the first time that Boko Haram would be impacting politics, because the political elite has used Boko Haram in the past, hasn't it? What can the international community do, or what can Nigeria's neighbors do to resolve the crisis in Nigeria?
I think the first steps towards this have already been taken.
In the Paris summit.
In the Paris meeting, and it will be followed up by the London meeting. As I said to you at the very beginning, I think this is a Nigerian plus regional sort of setup.
Yeah.
So if the neighbors collaborate, certainly I think they can restrict the freedom of movement of the fighters moving across borders more easily. But I think this has already become an international issue, essentially because the kidnapping of the girls, for whatever reason, I think was a mistake. The threat to convert them or to convert them to Islam, I think, was another mistake. To start kidnapping foreigners and now to kidnap the Chinese, and I think one has been killed, was another mistake. So I think a series of mistakes have been committed. Now these may be deliberate. They may be wanting to draw attention to their cause. They may be wanting to draw attention to the international community, so that the people who they want released can be released. But I think the downside is that now the international community is talking about UN Security Council action. What surprises me though is that ECOWAS has not got into the act, which I would have thought a regional organization would get into the act much earlier. But I think several mistakes have been made by Boko Haram, which do not spell well for them.
Okay. Abbas, Sachdev, isn't the international community faced with a dilemma? I mean, everybody is outraged by the kidnap of these 276 girls and what is being done to them. But at the same time, if international forces go in, some kind of assistance is given, you end up legitimizing President Goodluck Jonathan's regime. Now, he is no friend of rule of law, he is no friend of human rights, he is no friend of transparent governance. So, is it possible that if international community helps, Goodluck Jonathan in effect gets a pass for his corruption?
I don't see it that way. I think, be as it may, current regime in Nigeria has the legitimacy.
Exactly.
And they are fighting a very vicious movement, which is no holds barred, which does not subscribe to any humanitarian aspects. As we have seen, churches have been bombed, schools and colleges have been bombed, marketplaces have been bombed. Of course, there are contrarian issues about Nigeria's own track record in terms of Amnesty report on and Human Rights Watch's report, etc., on Nigerian armed forces. But I think the international community cannot sort of sit on the fence on this particular one.
So I have one last question for all of you. If you could just give me a one-line answer, or a short answer really, is that how should India view this crisis, in the sense that there is a large Indian business footprint in Nigeria? How does it affect our interests? Let's begin with you, Professor.
I think India should not take a major decision on this regard, but watch out. watch out that anything trying to, likely to affect our policy must intervene in that stage. If we directly intervene, that will create alarm.
Oh, of course, I'm not suggesting intervention. I'm just saying how should we view it. Master Sachdev?
During my term, which ended about 7 months ago, I have assiduously cultivated the governor of Borno. He has been to India twice. We have helped him set up vocational training centers. We have helped the education through IL and FS Kayans, irrigation facilities, and other training under ITEC. I think we should continue on that score.
Okay.
Secondly, we should tell our community to be on the watch.
Okay. Last word to you, because we are running out of time.
No, I think we have to be supportive of the Nigerian authorities, and I think in private we have to also give them the right message that a certain amount of dialogue has to be conducted with such kind of people. Okay. But I must just add the last point that our people have faced kidnappings in other parts of Nigeria in the last few years. It's not new. They have mainly been for kidnapping and ransom, and this has happened frequently in the Port Harcourt area, for instance. But having said that, I think it's important for us to be supportive of a legitimate government in Abuja, and at the same time, we are undertaking, as Ambassador Sachdev said, a lot of activity in Nigeria which should help reduce this so-called gap of or inequalities that exist. We are in big time into human resource development and investments in Nigeria, which will help reduce these gaps.
All right. Okay, we've run out of time. I'd like to thank all of you for taking time and coming here and analyzing this complex situation for our viewers. That's all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week with another interesting issue. Till then, goodbye and thanks for watching.